It's time for episode 16 of the Mystical Times blog podcast with me, Michelle Eve. Today's episode is about ghost animals. Ghost animals have been seen for centuries, whether it was a beloved pet in a house where the owners reside, or, if in the open, it can be a creature that can be labelled as a harbinger of bad luck. There have even been cases where horses are seen either pulling a carriage or has a rider on its back. I'll share with you 3 experiences of ghost animals in which all 3 are rather different from one another. And don't forget, if you've had a spooky experience, then I want to hear about it. Send your spooky encounters to spooky@mysticaltimesblog.com. The dog in the darkness. For this spooky encounter, we go to a terraced house that was built in the early 80s, and it comes from David, who wrote to tell me about the strange goings-on that happened in his home. David was living there with his parents when the strange activity began. There would be a terrible loud howling noise that came from the kitchen. It sounded as though it was a dog or wolf howling, but parts of the howling sounded almost human too. The howl would last for around 4 seconds, starting with a low moan or growl for a second or 2, then building up to the full howl. It had a very deep tone to it, and David said he had never heard anything like it before, and it was rather hard to describe due to the dog/wolf sound, along with the human element. David said he was the first to hear the howling, as after he had heard it a couple of times, his mum asked him if he'd heard any noises in the house. The conversation went something like this. "What kind of noises?" "Nothing. Forget I asked." "Wait, do you mean like a dog?" It wasn't a dog. It was after this conversation that, on occasion, David and his mum would hear the howling together. They took this in their stride and even referred to the noise as the werewolf. The howling was sporadic. Months could go past before it was heard again. There also seemed to be no reason or rhyme as to when it would occur. It was in 1987 when David's girlfriend stayed over at the house. She slept on a fold-out sofa bed in the living room, and it was that night that something strange happened. It was around 30 minutes after everyone had gone to bed when David's girlfriend ran up to his bedroom and he could see she was visibly distressed. She told him that a huge dog was just sitting there, watching her. David took what she said seriously and went downstairs, but could find no trace of a dog in the house. In the mid-90s, David was woken up in the early hours of the morning as his neighbour's daughter was shouting,
"Help! I've just seen a ghost."
David's curiosity got the better of him, so when he saw his neighbour, he asked if anybody in her house had seen anything weird. And straight away, the neighbour said she would sometimes see a strange dog in the house from time to time. David went on to tell me that the kitchen, where the noise always came from, is on the side adjacent to the neighbour's house, with their kitchen on the other side of the dividing wall, and David's bedroom, from which he heard the daughter shout, was directly above the kitchen. The howling noise was heard around 8 or 9 times from the 1980s to the mid-1990s. Also around this time, David's mum was reunited with one of her sisters, and when the sister visited the house for the first time, she exclaimed that she had once lived in the previous terrace house that had once stood where David's family home was now. She had lived in the previous house back in the 1960s, and that house had straddled the footprint of David's house and the neighbour who had seen the ghost dog. It wasn't too long when the mum's sister began talking about seeing a large dog that showed up at night when she had lived there. David added that all mentions of seeing this strange dog were never prompted and were said with sincerity. The witnesses who saw the dog would always mention the large size of the animal and say it was strange, but no further details of what it looked like. David added that nobody ever really described it in any detail other than remarking on its size and it being strange, without actually being able to explain what was strange about it. In most cases, it was seen in the dark, so it was probably just the outline or general shape they saw. Nobody ever mentioned coloration, markings, the eyes, or any other details. Going by David's account of this strange haunting, it would appear that only females saw this large dog, and it really makes me wonder as to why that happened. There were pets living in the house at the time these events occurred, but they showed no response to the howling. David still lives in the same house, and happily reports he no longer hears the howling, and next door had a new family move in over a decade ago, and they have not mentioned anything strange happening in their home either. The Ghostly Hounds of Gloucestershire. This incident was reported to a local Gloucestershire newspaper in 1950. It happened in a wooded area near Little Badminton in Gloucestershire. A group of 4 people, who were 2 married couples, decided to go on an all-night ramble in the wooded area. One of the husbands remembers checking his watch when a local church clock struck at 12:45 a.m, when all of a sudden 2 spectre hounds, who seemed to have appeared from nowhere, sped down a pathway where the group had just been walking on. There was no sound, and the hounds never touched the ground whilst running. The hounds' tongues were hanging out, as the group was paralysed by wonderment and fear at such a sight. The hounds, with their heads down, headed towards the tombs of the Dukes of Beaufort, which were at the foot of a grassy knoll opposite of the path. The ghostly dogs took no notice of their observers, as they seemed to be focused on where they were running to. The couples all exclaimed that the appearance of these spectral hounds were gruesome, and the silence that accompanied their movements was deafening. There have been no hunting nor hunting dogs for over 2 decades in this area, so just what had these couples seen? There are no further reports on this sighting, unfortunately. The Haunted Alleyway. On the dark nights of January, there is said to be a ghostly figure that roams in the narrow alleyway that runs behind the houses on St. Philip's Street, Cheltenham, in Gloucestershire. This male figure is sometimes spotted carrying a gas mask, but will ask passers-by if they have seen his dog. It is then that the passer-by hears the sound of a dog barking, to which the spectral figure then just disappears back into the darkness of the night. The last documented sighting of this male ghostly figure was in the year of 2000. That's all for this episode, and I do hope you enjoyed hearing those spooky encounters. For the next episode, episode 17, I'll be telling the backstory behind the ghost children of the railway tracks. Till next time.